And we are back from the Simployer TV studio, sending live through Oslo Business Forum's channels today. Now the topic is the day after tomorrow, and Peter Hinssen, who will be on stage behind me here later today, has entered our studio. Welcome.
Thank you.
You talk about the day after tomorrow,
yes.
Which must be said is not a Hollywood movie.
No, it was. I mean, we had a lot of conversations with the lawyers to clear the rights.
And who ended up winning?
Well, we had to prove them that it was not a disaster movie, but actually, a strategy for the future.
But are there any parallels to the future, like the tragic future, or are we prepared for what's expected?
Now.
I think in a lot of cases we're seeing that the world is changing faster than ever before. This is something that many of us see more in our personal life than in our work environment, but it's undeniable. I mean, and I believe it's only going to accelerate. We're going to see that things are coming together. We see technologies that influence each other, and in my belief there's only one conclusion: it will go faster.
And it goes really fast, and what was normal yesterday is something new tomorrow. When does a new thing becomes normal?
Well, faster than ever before. I wrote a book, Digital is the New Normal, a few years ago, and when I did it, digital was still an adjective. Now digital is no longer an adjective. I mean, if people use digital, they sound really old. I hate it when I get invited to companies and say, oh, we have a digital strategy. And I think, really? That is so old school.
So what do you think we should say when we talk about strategy and it's in the digital direction?
Then I think you have a strategy for a world that's becoming digital, but not a digital strategy. You cannot just sideline that and see that as a separate activity. It becomes integral, and if you have children, you see that every single day. I have a 19-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, and for them, digital was never an adjective. I mean, I always use the example, you put a camera on a table and you ask people, what is it? And people like us would say, oh, it's a digital camera. They will say, it's a camera, because they've never seen an analog camera in their life. So we should stop using the word.
So from now on, digitalization, it's out.
It's normal, and I think what we're beginning to see is that more and more technologies are becoming normalized. I mean, when you talk about social, has become normal. When you talk about mobile, it's become normal. And maybe we should start talking about the never normal, because we're constantly getting into situations where this rapid change is the only constant that we have. And unfortunately, we haven't built organizations for that.
And speaking of organizations, leading through these times, how does this challenge leadership?
Well, I think it's a fundamental, switch that we need to do, and primarily a mindset switch. I mean, you now have companies run by executives or boards that come from the old age. They come from a world which was relatively slow. They all have an MBA, which is the dumbest education you can get, because an MBA is really a 20th century education. It prepared you for a world of trying to predict the future by extrapolating. That's basically what an MBA is. And we now get into the 21st century where that doesn't apply anymore. We talk about VUCA because that is the new normality: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And unfortunately, we haven't trained our executives or our boards or our instruments to deal with that. We're not comfortable being uncomfortable. We're not comfortable not knowing. And that is the biggest mind shift that we have to have.
But this put a pressure on continuous learning, because these people, you still have the same workforce. And how do you change them and prepare them to being the new workers? Because you can't really exchange them all and have 20-year-olds coming in.
And I think reskilling is probably the word of 2019. It's a fundamental question that every company should ask. And there's no trivial answer to that. It's reskilling at a lot of levels. I mean, what you now see is that in the early days of automation and robots, people said, oh my God, this is going to destroy all the blue-collar workers. And it doesn't. If you go to a Volvo factory, I mean, you've got a shitload of robots already, and humans and robots have learned to actually work together. But what we're now seeing is that if you look at artificial intelligence and automation, it's probably going to destroy white-collar workers much faster than blue-collar workers. Maybe we shouldn't even make the distinction anymore. More and more we talk about new-collar workers. But what I think is the reskilling part, that is going to be essential. And it's happening all over the place. I'll give you a practical example. I live in Belgium, and our national telephone company had I think about 15,000 people. And recently the CEO, an amazing woman, said, I have to fire 1,900 people because I cannot reskill them for the 21st century, and I need to hire 1,250 new people with new skills, and I don't find them on the market. That becomes a huge societal issue.
But how do you close that gap?
Well, I think one of the core elements that we have to do is we shouldn't just say, oh, we don't find these people. We have to look at the root cause. The root cause, in my opinion, is education. In many countries around the world, education has become the slowest moving part of society. I mean, we're not equipped to actually deal with these changing environments. And unless we fundamentally change the concept of education, I think we're always going to have these issues.
But when it comes to the jobs that people worry about, you said at HR Tech here in Norway just a few weeks ago that 10% of the jobs are going to disappear, but you can guarantee that everything's going to change. Can you elaborate on how business leaders and managers should manage in that kind of perspective?
Absolutely. And I think I'll give a practical example. AT&T in the US is retraining, reskilling 150,000 of its employees. People with technical skills that they hired in the 20th century to connect cables, but in a wireless world, we don't need that anymore. And these people are being reskilled. There's a huge program in the US called Upskill America, where they're constantly focusing on that reskilling. But I believe that this is not about just supplying trainings and online platforms. This is a mindset shift. This is about rethinking how we're going to think about employment and work going forward. And that is going to be the #1 priority for companies and boards in the next 10 years.
But I mean, we focus so much on the future, we think, but we still have lagging of yesterday following us into that future. How do you balance taking care of the problems of yesterday and thinking the new thoughts?
Yeah.
It's not so easy to balance.
No, it's very difficult, and I wrote a book on that, The Day After Tomorrow, where I say, if you look at today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, we spend an extraordinary amount of time in today, because you're going to get 150 emails that when you wake up in the morning, you don't even know those 150 are going to be that important. That's not the problem. The problem is tomorrow. How do we look at tomorrow? And most companies do that by extrapolating today and hoping that it's approximately going to be the same. And then there's the day after tomorrow, which is new ideas, new business models, new technologies, things that change the rule of the game. And traditionally, we spend almost no time on that because we focused on tomorrow. Now we have to shift that lens and focus on that. At the same time, there's the shit of yesterday, which is dragging us down. And what you see with many companies, they say, oh, yes, we have a lot of shit of yesterday. You know what? We'll clean that up first. First, we got to get our legacy in order, and then we have time. And that never happens. I mean, that is a fundamental problem. You need to be prepared to do both. And that means getting uncomfortable. That means doing things you've never done before. That means being comfortable about the uncertainty and the unexpectability. And that is a mindset shift because we haven't trained people for that. We haven't built managers for that. We haven't educated them. But
one of the things, when you're saying all this, it sounds perfect, it sounds great, seems like the right thing to do. But business leaders and people, managers who hear this, how do I go home to my workplace tomorrow and follow up on your advice?
Well,
practically.
Absolutely, and I think there's a couple of things that you need to take into account if you want to be successful in those transformations. I think there's 3 things. First of all, this is top-down commitment. I mean, if you don't have the top leadership who really believe that you need a sense of urgency and to act upon it, I say quit. I mean, if you don't have that, just get out. I've seen many companies, and I do a lot of speeches around the world where people say, oh, yeah, yes, but our boss doesn't. And I say, well, it's never going to happen. Number 2 is you've got to figure out, because there's a technological component to this, what technology could actually do. But the third thing is the culture and mindset shift. And often, I see that it's easier to do it with people who are closer to the future than people who are farther from the future. My 2 lenses onto the future are my 2 kids, and if I see how they look on a world that is constantly changing, they're much more comfortable with that. And I think if we adopt and understand how that works, we can probably start to understand what it means for us.
So looking forward is the key.
Well, it's not just that. I think it's fundamentally understanding that we need to be at ease with being in the zone where you don't have all the answers. And that is something which is very difficult because there's a whole generation of managers which loves their controls and their spreadsheets and their Excels and their budgets, which basically don't work anymore in a world that is changing so fast. I now meet companies that said, you know what, this whole budget thing, we threw it out because it actually only depresses us. I mean, we're seeing more and more research. I mean, many companies now show that only 13% of what you do in a year is something that you've actually thought of in the beginning of the year. It means that we have a huge amount of things that we need to be prepared for that are completely unpredictable.
Thank you so much, Peter Hinssen, for joining us. We will be back from Simployer TV later on today, so stay tuned.